Hi everybody, I'm Zilla Blitz and welcome. Today we're going to take a look at some gameplay from Gettysburg A Time for Heroes. This is a 2-hour low complexity board game about the Battle of Gettysburg. Let's jump in and take a look. So here's a picture of our game. This game is currently in action, and in this video I'm going to be showing a full game turn. So we're going to play through both the Confederate and the Union sides and take a look at all of the different activations and actions that both sides can take. This hopefully will give you an idea to see if this gameplay is something that you might like. Now, earlier, I posted a full overview video of the game. I'll put a link to that up in the top right-hand corner. So that will allow us to skip some of the details and just jump right into the action here. Lastly, I'm playing this game two-handed solitaire. So I'm playing both the Confederate side and the Union side. There is a full solitaire variant for this game, the official solitaire rule set for this game. I have played that, but I'm not using that now. I'll talk a little bit about how that works after we take a look at the two-handed game that we're playing now, the regular two-player game that we're looking at right now. With that being said, let's jump right in now and take a look at our battle situation. So we're looking at the battle map of Gettysburg, and to put us into a time frame, this is a 3-day battle, July 1st, 2nd, and 3rd in 1863. And right now we are in the middle of the afternoon on the first day. So both sides are bringing their units are arriving from both sides, with the Confederate forces coming in from this side, and the Union forces coming in from the other two sides over here. Confederate forces are butternut, and they've got 4 of their formations have arrived in the battlefield. They have 9 in total, so more than half of their forces will still be coming in, with most of the forces arriving on this second day here. Likewise, the Union forces have 7 formations, 4 of them are on, they still have 3 more to arrive. So the battle now is at the stage where it's heating up. It's the afternoon of the first day, both sides realizing this could be a potentially significant battle in the American Civil War. Now, what is happening? There's a number of victory point locations here, and we'll take a closer look at these in a moment, that kind of focus the battle, if you would. Confederate forces are trying to take those at the start of the game. The Union forces already by default have those under Union control. So I'm going to zoom in here and we'll take a closer look at the battle here to get an idea of what's gone on so far, keeping in mind that we have Anderson, who has just arrived off to the edge of the map here. He's the only one we won't be able to see. Here's a look at the central focus of the battle right now. Now we can see Rhodes, Heath, and Pender for the Confederate forces have pushed up, closing here in on Gettysburg. They've already captured this victory point location, Lutheran Seminary, which has given them 1 victory point. We'll talk about victory points in a minute. Howard has brought his forces up into Gettysburg itself, and this brown cube indicates they're building defensive fortifications, redoubts that they're holding up, trying to kind of dig in around Gettysburg to stop the Confederate advance. Reynolds is over here to the south of Gettysburg, and then we have Slocum and Sykes having just arrived. They're arriving and trying to race up to help shore up the Union positions. Now, why is this important? Well, let's talk about victory conditions. The Confederate forces can win in 2 ways. They can win by eliminating 3 Union units and basically wearing them down to the point that they flee the battlefield. Or they can win by capturing a certain number of victory points by a certain game point turn. So it varies by turn. But on July 1st, in the afternoon of July 1st, if the Confederates have 3 victory point locations in hand, they win the battle. So they can potentially win this battle in the first day by moving quickly and moving aggressively to capture victory point locations. That victory point, that victory condition is going to be a factor in what we do for the Confederates, because right now they already have 1. Potentially they could come up here and take Gettysburg for 2, maybe pushing to Cemetery Hill if they get lucky and take 3, forcing the Union forces to counterattack or concede the field already on July 1st. The only way for the Union forces to win is to eliminate 4 Confederate units. And so this is kind of a longer game that they're playing. They're trying to inflict more casualties and make the Confederates pay for every bit of ground that they try to take. So that's the current situation. There's only one conceptual thing we want to take a look at before we can really start into the action. And that's, you may have noticed there's no numerical information on any of the blocks. So you might be asking, well, how do we destroy a unit? How do we break a unit? How do we wear units down? All that is done through the concept of cohesion, and that's where these boxes on either side of the map, for the Union forces up here, Confederate forces down here, where these cohesion trackers come into play. So in order to understand that concept, let's take a look at the cohesion trackers for Heath and Pender and show how they work. Once we've got that done, we can jump right into the action. So here are the cohesion trackers for Heath and Pender, respectively. And cohesion in the game is basically a concept for the overall readiness and capacity of a unit in a formation to fight. And how it works basically is you can suffer cohesion losses in combat. So for example, Heath might suffer a couple of cohesion losses in combat, dropping his unit's cohesion down to 10. But you also burn cohesion to activate a unit for movement and combat. So when we activate Heath in this turn, it's going to cost cohesion point to do so. Basically, they're losing their overall energy and capacity to fight the more you ask them to move and fight in battle. Now, gradually these are going to decrease over the course of the battle, and you'll notice this yellow section in here and a red section down here, starting with 5. What this happens is whenever a unit drops down into this yellow segment, so say for example, Heath is at 7 and then they suffer 2 combat losses in battle. As soon as that is resolved, you then have to make a cohesion test, a cohesion check on the unit. And basically you roll a 6-sided die and you have to roll this number or less to keep the unit in battle. So if Heath's cohesion falls to a 5 and then we do that cohesion check and we roll a 6, Heath's unit breaks and is eliminated from the battle. So basically what you're trying to do as both sides is to wear down your opponent's units, get them down into these cohesion check levels, and then hoping that they fail those cohesion checks, can be removed from the battle, and you can claim them as one unit knocked out of action. So that's going to have a bearing on everything that you do in the battle, and it's going to have a bearing on the decisions that we make coming up now as we look at the Confederates' turn and figure out what do we want to do on the afternoon of July 1st with these Confederate forces that we've got at Gettysburg. So now we can start showing some action, we can really start to dig into some gameplay. Let's get going. Now, I mentioned earlier that we're going to show a full turn. Actually, just to clarify, we're going to show one activation of a turn. So the game is technically broken down into 6 turns, but those turns contain multiple activations. We're going to do one part then of a turn, but we're going to see all the aspects, the important aspects of gameplay, so we should get a good look at what gameplay is like. Now you might be thinking, can you just move units how you like and move them all or something like that? The answer is no. This is a card-driven game, so in order to move units, we have to activate them by playing cards. Now, I'm going to show the 2 cards that the Confederate forces are currently holding left to play on July 1st. So here are the 2 cards the Confederates currently have in their hand, and let's take a look at how these cards work. We have an image of the leader of the formation, and then at the top we have the name. In this case, it is Anderson. And the name at the top, when you play this card, whatever name is at the top, that formation can take 2 actions. So 2 moves or 2 attacks, or a move and an attack. And so it is the stronger. It's called a major activation. Now these numbers beside the names here show the entry locations that a formation can come into if it isn't already on the map. So we don't have to worry about those because for the units we're going to play, they're already in the map. Then down below we have 2 more names here for this card. These units would activate with a minor activation. So by playing this card, Confederate forces would activate 3 formations. Anderson's going to take 2 actions, Early would take 1 action, and Pickett would take 1 action. And that's basically how these cards work. Down below we have these black boxes. This is how many momentum cubes you get when you play that card. We'll talk more about momentum cubes as they come up in the course of play. So our question is right now, given these options, what do we want to do? It's not a bad option here to play Anderson, who, if we recall, is off more to the west of the battlefield, down below at the bottom of the screen. We could move him up and maybe do a minor activation. We could get Early and Pickett onto the battlefield. They haven't arrived yet. But this one here for Heth and Rhodes. Heth is right here and Rhodes is right here. They are both in line to attack Howard, and this is a victory point location. So I think this one has a little bit more urgency than our Anderson card, which we can play in the next activation. So for the Confederates, let's play this one and attack Howard. Now Howard too, if we look at his cohesion, we can see that he's not generally a very strong unit. He only starts out with 12 cohesion, and he's already burned through 2 of them, moving up into position here around Gettysburg. So we potentially, as the Confederates, could really beat him down, perhaps even forcing him to retreat up on the Cemetery Hill or Culp's Hill even farther away. So this could be a potentially good attack for the Confederate forces, and that's what we will start with. To play a card, we're going to put the card here on the current activation slot. Now, usually there's already cards here, and you're going to shift the one that was there over to played, shift this one to here, and so on and so forth. But in the previous turn, the Confederate forces played 3 cards that had the same number, a 3rd card in a row that had the same number of black cubes there, in which case you get a momentum cube bonus. and then you move all the cards to the discard pile. So that just happened. That's why there's no cards here right now. If that doesn't make sense, it's not particularly important. But we're going to play Heth, and immediately we take 3 of these momentum cubes upon playing the card. We're going to put them in our supply of momentum cubes. Currently, the Confederate forces have 5 momentum cubes with the addition of these 3. So this card is in play. Now, we can start with the major activation for Heth, or we can start with the minor activation for Rhodes. Let's actually start with the minor activation for Rhodes. So right away, this is going to show how combat works. We're going to start with the minor activation for Rhodes, which he can take 1 action, and his action is going to be to attack Howard along these connected black lines. Now, very important, we'll notice that there's a black arrow pointing towards Howard. That black arrow signifies that there is no die roll modifier to this combat in terms of the number of dice that you're throwing. Now, the way combat works is only the attacker throws dice. So Rhodes is going to throw a certain number of dice, and then we're going to look for specific types of results here. So let's first determine how many dice Rhodes is going to throw. To find the number of dice Rhodes throws, we look on his cohesion chart, and we see down here in the bottom left corner 5 dice. Now, there can be terrain modifiers here, but the black arrow means that there is no terrain modifier, so we're going to keep these dice. If it were a red arrow, we would reduce by 1 die. If it were a green arrow, we would add 2 dice in here. Now, because we're activating Rhodes for action, there's one other thing that we have to do. We have to go to Rhodes' cohesion chart and reduce his cohesion by 1, because we're activating him for movement and combat. So basically, at this point in time, the Confederate forces can throw the dice. You might be saying, well, how does combat work then? Let's take a look at this combat results table, and we can see that these show how combat works. If we get double 1s with some of our dice, the attacker loses 1 cohesion. Likewise with double 2s, we lose 1 cohesion as the attacking Confederate forces. If we roll, for every 3 that we roll, we get 1 additional momentum cube. And then for pairs of 4, 5s, and 6s, we inflict damage on the defender. 4 and 5 is 1 loss of cohesion to the defender, but 2 6s means the defender loses 2 cohesion and they must retreat. So Howard would have to retreat. So this is basically how a base combat action would work, but there is more, because the game also has tactics cards and it has readouts. So let's talk about how we might want to use those. To do that, let's start with the tactics cards. We're going to look at the tactics cards that the Confederates currently hold. So currently the Confederate forces are holding 3 tactics cards. Now you get 2 tactics cards at the beginning of the game, these ones that are set for your flag. And you also then, as the game goes along, you can pay the momentum cube cost and buy 1 card at the end of each activation. So we can see that this cover card that the Confederate forces bought earlier in the battle cost them 2 momentum cubes. So we will perhaps use our momentum cubes to buy another tactics card at the end of the turn. But for right now, we have to decide if we want to play any 3 of these cards. Now, cover says minus 1 die for the attacker. Well, we don't want to play that because we are the attacker, so that wouldn't make sense to reduce our combat. You'd play that when the Union is attacking. Rebel Yell over here means the Union player can't use momentum cubes this activation, but that doesn't really have an impact on combat as the defender, so we're going to save that. This one here, however, adjust 1 die to any face after the initial die roll and retain it if rerolls are made for each combat in this activation. We're going to make 3 attacks on this activation here. So I think this is actually a really good card for us to play. Basically means we're going to roll all 5 dice, and then we can change one of those dies to whatever we want it to be. Of course, we'll probably change it to a 6, right? So we're going to play Louisiana Tigers, and this will remove the card from the game, but we'll keep it nearby to remember that. And that means that we're going to be able to roll the dice and then change 1 die on our combat roll. So we're pretty much ready to roll for combat now. However, there are things that the defender could do. The Union forces, for example, might have a card that they could play that it could increase their defensive capacity or reduce the offensive capacity of the Confederate forces. But for the moment, we're not going to play a Union card. They don't really have anything that I want to play here. However, we do have one more thing to consider here, which is this readout. Now, a readout can be expended. Basically, these are your defensive fortifications. They can be extended and used up. And what that allows you to do is to set 1 die before the attacker rolls for the entire combat that happens during this unit's activation in this turn. So we're going to do that. We're going to have Howard burn up his readout. And so that means instead of rolling 5 dice, the Confederate forces are going to roll 4. And as the Union forces, we can set 1 to whatever we want to. So we're going to set it to a 1, which means it's going to inflict damage on the attacker. So that locks that die for combat. Confederate forces are going to roll 4 dice, but they can adjust one of them to whatever they want to after they roll on this combat. So we are all set now for combat. And with that, the action begins. So Rhodes' forces leaves Pennsylvania College. They're attacking the town of Gettysburg, and they come up onto the town and start fighting. Oh, okay, so we get 2 3s, a 4, and a 5. So here is our combat result of Rhodes' attacks on Howard. The good thing for the Confederates is there's no doubles of 1s and 2s, so they haven't suffered any losses on the attack. They haven't inflicted any damage yet. However, Louisiana Tigers says that we can adjust 1 die roll after the initial roll. So we can do this. We can shift that 4 to a 5, which means now we've got double 5s, which means we inflict 1 cohesion loss on the defender, Howard. And we would get 2 momentum cubes as a result of rolling these 2 3s, which is actually kind of handy to have more momentum cubes. The question we do want to ask, however, is whether we want to re-roll any dice. And we can't re-roll the readout. That one's been locked in for all stages of the combat. But we could re-roll these 2 3s and try to get better numbers. To re-roll, we would have to do, we have one of 2 options. We can either expend 3 of our momentum cubes to re-roll the dice, or we can reduce the cohesion on Rhodes' unit already by 1 to reduce it to kind of get a chance to re-roll the dice. But looking at this, we can't re-roll the 1. We've already got a hit. To re-roll the 2 3s to something better, like doubles, I don't think that's really good odds. So we're just going to take this as the way it is, and we're going to go and reduce Howard's momentum by 1 for this battle and draw 2 momentum cubes. So Howard's momentum goes down from 11 to 9. They've suffered casualties. The readout is expended and gone now, so Howard is in a less solid defensive position. All our dice come off. Rhodes has been unable to advance because Howard's position held. The Louisiana Tigers card, however, is still in play for the rest of this activation. And now, with the other half of this activation, we're going to activate Heth. And Heth can attack twice against Howard, which could really put the damage on Howard. However, the Union forces have a perfect tactics card to play in this situation. Take a look at General Buford, which says, a chosen enemy activated formation does not move, but pays its activation. And this I thought was a touch ambiguous, because could it attack, for example? Is that a movement, or could it build readouts or something? But it's actually, this unit can't do anything at all. I looked it up on Wargame Geek to clarify. So the Union forces are going to play this right before Heath starts to attack them, which means that Heath has to pay his activation cost, and yet he can't do anything. So for Heath's activation, we reduce it down to 11. He expends that energy, and yet Heath can't do a single thing. The General Buford card is discarded from the game. Thanks to that tactics card play, Howard actually is able to hold on to Gettysburg, and they've foiled the Confederate attack. And that actually comes to just about the end of the Confederate forces' turn. The last thing they can do in their turn is to possibly buy a tactics card. And off to the side, let's take a look and see which ones are available. So here are the 3 tactics cards that are available. I've twisted them so we can see them based on the camera here. We've got one called Panic, which actually I think is one that I like here. It says a selected enemy formation anywhere on the map must take a cohesion test. So this means if a unit goes down and it succeeds in passing a cohesion test, you could play this card anytime and force it to take another cohesion check, which this could be really handy to help break a Union unit. And so I think we're going to spend the 2 of our 5 momentum cubes here, put those back in the pool, and we're going to add the Panic card to the Confederate store of cards. And the last thing, before we do this turn, this tactics card was in this spot in the style here. We refill it, and had it been here, we would have slid the other 2 cards down. And if the Confederate forces didn't buy any card at all, you discard this one here, slide these 2 down, and add a new one. So you're constantly refreshing this deck. And now we can go to the Union turn. As with the Confederate turn, we're going to kind of lather, rinse, repeat. We have to pick from our potential unit activation cards. We have 2 possibilities. This one would activate Slocum up here for a major activation, which would allow us to attack Rhodes. We also have this minor activation would be Hancock. He's not in the battle yet, so he would come into the battlefield. This second card here would activate 3 units that haven't arrived yet. So it would bring 3 units to Gettysburg that haven't made it here yet. But I think I want to do this more aggressive one, because I'm thinking if we can activate Slocum, we can pull him down here to Schaefer's Farm, and then he can attack Pennsylvania College, potentially pushing the Confederate forces back, or at the very least forming a nice line with the Union forces to try to protect some of these victory point locations. Now, one thing to clarify with the game too, there's no formation types like line or column, and there's no flanking or anything. It's all just everything we saw with attacks was basically what we saw in that last activation. So we don't have to worry about being flanked from the side from these positions or anything. So with that in mind, let's activate this card here, Slocum and Hancock. I will leave this here so we can see it as we're going through things, but I also will take the 2 black momentum cubes for the Union side, and they now have 4 momentum cubes available to use to either buy cards at the end or to use for a reroll and an attack. And now we can actually get going. Well, we could do these in any order. It doesn't really matter. Let's actually start out by the minor activation with Hancock. So we will bring him in. Now these numbers come into play. We can see here we've got an 8 or a 9. So let's take a look at that on the map and then bring Hancock's formation in. Down to the south here we have this entry point, which is a 9, and this entry point, which is an 8. We could bring him in a couple of places, and this is a minor activation, so he can only move once. I think I would like to get some Union forces potentially guarding these victory point locations here. So I think we're going to bring him in at 9, and this is not part of the move. He just enters here at 9, and then he moves. And so he's going to, let's take this straight line here along the road, which takes us up to Welker's Hill, and this will put us in a nice defensive position. It's got a red arrow, so if Confederate forces make their way over here, they've got to attack uphill from the wheat field here. Now, one other thing that we have to do, because we activated Hancock and used him for movement, we have to move him to burn up a cohesion point. So his cohesion goes down from a 14 to a 13. He's got a nice attack value of 6 dice too, so a rather powerful offensive unit. That takes care of Hancock's activation. Now let's do the attack with Slocum. So Slocum will be the major activation here, so he can move and attack twice. He can do a couple of options. Let's see how this works for him. With the first activation, and I will off camera now, I'm going to move Slocum's cohesion rating down 1 because he's activating for a minus major activation, so his cohesion comes down to 10 now. But we're going to move him from here to Schaefer's Farm, and that would be 1 action, right? This movement across here. And then with the second action, let's have him come down here and attack Rhodes, and we'll calculate what this attack looks like. Slocum has a 5-die attack capability, so we have 5 attacking dice. We'll notice that there's a black arrow right there coming into Rhodes, so there's no modifications to the dice right there. And we could play some cards. The Union forces do have a card similar to what the Confederate forces does, but we're only making 1 attack this turn, so I don't want to use that card. We could have the Confederates play that cover card, which gives -1 die to the attacker. But I also want to save that for perhaps a more pressing or more critical attack. So we're not going to use any cards. That means this is just a straight up regular 5-die attack. So we'll roll this and see how we do. Ooh, that's a pretty good attack there for Slocum. So Slocum gets a pair of 6s, which is 2 hits to Rhodes' cohesion, and Rhodes has to retreat. There's no other doubles and there's no 3s, so that's it. Now we could potentially burn a cohesion point or burn some momentum cubes to reroll these 3, but honestly, even these 2 to see if we get another pair of 5s, but I think we're good. This is a great attack for Slocum, so let's take the casualties off of Rhodes' unit and then retreat him. So Rhodes takes 2 hits, going down to 12 and then down to 11. He's a strong unit, starting out at 15, but he's taken a beating so far in the attack, and now he has to retreat. We have a few options here. We could go back to Bloker's Knoll or Oak Ridge. I'm not sure it makes all that much of a difference, but what I do like here, the Union forces take that. Oak Ridge gets a green attack on this position. So let's have Rhodes slide back here to Oak Ridge, and Slocum will come in and take Pennsylvania College, pushing the Union forces away. But this would be a potentially strong return counterattack on the Confederates' turn. So the Union forces now have taken that, and that brings us to the end of their activation. The last thing that we have to do for the Union forces would be to potentially spend any momentum cubes to buy another tactics card. I kind of like this one, this resilience roll. It says re-roll any single die at no cost, because it only costs 1 momentum cube. So we'll spend that momentum cube and the Union will add this tactics card to their hand. And that brings them down to 3 momentum cubes. But still, I think that's a good purchase for 1 cost of 1 momentum. Once again, we resupply the deck here, get a reflection card, and fill up the tactics card. And with that, we come to the end of this activation. We've pretty much seen the core of gameplay. There is a unique activation that each side has one of them in the entire game. And it's a very powerful activation. You can only use it once. We haven't seen that. We haven't seen a mechanic which allows you to transfer cohesion points across units. We haven't, of course, seen a very wide range of the tactics cards and a few other kind of minor elements of the rules and things. But for the most part, we've seen all of the major elements of gameplay in this one activation for both sides. We've seen attacks and movement. We've talked about victory conditions. We've talked about how cohesion works. This should give you an idea, I think, of how the game plays. I would like to talk a little bit now about the solo mode, which I wasn't aware of when I made the first overview video. After I made that, the designer and a couple other people reached out and said that there had been, after the game was released, a complete official solo rule set. And I've had a chance to play with that now, and I really liked it. It was quite fun. I'll talk a little bit more about that in an impressions video that I'm going to make, but I would change my solitaire rating of this game from a 4.5 up to a 7 based on that. There are a couple places I had to fill in with a little bit of house rules to kind of get it to work, but once I did that, played really smoothly. You can play either the Confederate side or the Union side, or you can have both sides play solo against each other. But I really enjoyed it. I squeaked out a victory, but it was by far from a certain thing, and it plays a little bit differently in that the AI side, whichever side is using the bot, doesn't use tactics cards, and they have generals then activate either cautiously or aggressively, and that dictates what types of actions they take on the battlefield. And it all works well. They also have very potent attacks, but because they're not using the tactics card, it kind of gives them a disadvantage. So all in all, I felt like it worked out to be a pretty fun way to play the game solitaire. So I'm really impressed with the solo mode. I've also enjoyed playing it two-handed solo like we're playing right now too. So I kind of want to revise my solitaire rating of the game, and I'll talk more about that in the impressions video. But hopefully you've enjoyed this demonstration of gameplay. I'll put a link to the impressions video as soon as it's ready. Thanks for watching. I'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have as well. Gettysburg, A Time for Heroes from Worthington Publishing.